I never thought I'd be the one telling this story. I never imagined that a quiet Wednesday afternoon in October would become the day everything I believed in, everything I had built my entire life around, would collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. But here I am. And if you're reading this, I need you to understand something before we go any further. I'm not an apostate. I'm not bitter. I'm not mentally diseased. I'm just a man who opened a door he was told never to open. And what I found on the other side changed me in ways I still can't fully articulate. My name is Daniel. For 43 years, I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Not just any witness, I was an elder. I served on judicial committees. I gave public talks. I pioneered for 11 consecutive years. I was the kind of man that other brothers looked up to, the kind of man that sisters trusted with their deepest confessions, the kind of man that circuit overseers praised by name from the platform. I was, by every measurable standard within that organization, a success. And I was living inside a lie so enormous that it makes me physically ill to think about it. Let me take you back to the beginning. It was October 14th, 2019. I was sitting in the back office of our Kingdom Hall in a small town I won't name, not to protect myself, but to protect the people who are still trapped inside and haven't yet found the courage to leave. The rain was hammering the windows, and I was reviewing some correspondence from the branch office. Routine stuff, letters about field service reports, adjustments to meeting schedules, the usual bureaucratic machinery that keeps the organization ticking like a well-oiled clock. Then I found it. It was tucked inside a manila envelope that had been mislabeled. It was supposed to go to the coordinator of the body of elders, not to me. But someone at the branch had made a clerical error. One tiny, almost insignificant mistake. And that mistake detonated a bomb in the center of my universe. Inside the envelope was a memorandum. Internal. Confidential. Stamped with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society letterhead. And it contained instructions, detailed, methodical, chillingly precise instructions, about how to handle a specific category of correspondence that elders were required to send to the branch office. The subject of that correspondence? Child sexual abuse. Now, I need to pause here and address something directly. If you are currently one of Jehovah's Witnesses, your first instinct right now is to stop reading. I know this because that would have been my instinct too. For 43 years, I was trained to shut down the moment I encountered information that contradicted the narrative I'd been given. I was taught that my critical thinking was dangerous, that my questions were symptoms of spiritual weakness, that my doubts were planted by Satan himself. I was taught that loyalty to the organization was synonymous with loyalty to God. But I'm asking you, no, I'm begging you to keep reading. Not because I want to destroy your faith, but because the truth deserves to be heard, even when it's ugly. Especially when it's ugly. The memorandum outlined a protocol that I had followed dozens of times over my years as an elder but had never fully understood in its broader context. When a case of child sexual abuse was reported to the elders, we were instructed to call the legal department at the branch office immediately, before calling the police, before notifying Child Protective Services, before doing anything else. We were told that the legal department would advise us on whether we were legally required to report the abuse to secular authorities based on the laws of our particular jurisdiction. On the surface, this might sound reasonable, responsible even, but here's what the memorandum revealed that I had never been told. The branch office had been systematically collecting and storing detailed records of every reported case of child sexual abuse within the organization. Every name, every accusation, every outcome, every detail. And they had been doing this for decades. The document referenced a database. Not a small, informal collection of notes, but a comprehensive, centralized database containing tens of thousands of files. 47,000 to be precise. 47,000 files documenting allegations of child sexual abuse committed by members of the organization worldwide. 47,000. I sat in that back office and read that number 3 times. I read it a 4th time. I put the document down, walked to the bathroom, and vomited. Let me tell you why that number destroyed me. In all my years as an elder, I had sat on perhaps a dozen judicial committees involving allegations of sexual abuse. Each time, I followed the protocol exactly as I'd been trained. I called the branch. I received instructions. In some cases, I was told that reporting to the authorities was legally required, and I complied. In other cases, and this is the part that now keeps me awake at night, I was told that reporting was not legally mandated, and I was instructed to handle the matter internally. Internally. Do you understand what that means? It means that I, a window washer with no training in criminal investigation, no degree in psychology, no expertise in trauma or forensics, was tasked with determining whether a child had been sexually abused, and then deciding what to do about it. It means that I sat across a table from trembling children and asked them to describe in detail what had been done to them, while their abuser sometimes sat in the very same room. It means that I applied a biblical standard, the two-witness rule, requiring two credible witnesses to establish a matter, to crimes that, by their very nature, almost never have witnesses. It means that I looked into the eyes of children who had been violated in the most horrific ways imaginable and told them that, because there was no second witness, the matter could not be established by the congregation. It means that their abusers walked free. It means that those abusers continued to sit in the same kingdom hall as their victims, sometimes for years, sometimes serving in positions of privilege, sometimes abusing again. And I did this believing I was following God's direction. The memorandum I found that Rainy Wednesday didn't just reveal the existence of the database. It revealed something far more devastating. The branch office knew. They had always known. They knew the scope of the problem. They had the numbers. They had the names. They had the patterns. They could see in black and white, in meticulously organized files, that predators were being protected, that children were being sacrificed on the altar of organizational reputation, that the two-witness rule was functioning not as a safeguard of justice but as a shield for monsters. And they did nothing. No, that's not accurate. They did something. They actively instructed elders not to report. They created a system designed to contain information rather than protect children. They built a fortress of legal protocols and confidentiality agreements and spiritual intimidation that ensured the outside world would never know what was happening behind the closed doors of kingdom halls and private homes and back offices, just like the one where I sat reading that document with shaking hands. I need to tell you about Sarah. Sarah was 11 years old when her mother brought her to me. I was serving as an elder in a different congregation at the time, about 15 years before I found the memorandum. Sarah's mother, I'll call her Patricia, was a devoted witness. She pioneered. She was at every meeting, every assembly, every convention. She loved Jehovah with every fiber of her being, and she trusted the elders with a faith so absolute that it still haunts me. Patricia told me that Sarah had disclosed something troubling. Sarah had told her mother that a brother in the congregation, a ministerial servant, a man in his late 30s who was well-liked and well-respected, had been touching her inappropriately during the meetings. He would volunteer to watch the children in the back room during the Watchtower study, and he would use those opportunities to put his hands where no adult should ever put their hands on a child. I followed the protocol. I called the branch. I spoke to a representative in the legal department. I was told that, in our jurisdiction, clergy were not mandatory reporters. I was told to investigate the matter internally. I was told to form a judicial committee. We brought in the accused brother. He denied everything. He was calm. He was articulate. He expressed shock and hurt that such an accusation would be made against him. He suggested that Sarah was a troubled child, that she had behavioral issues, that she was known to exaggerate. We had one witness, Sarah. We had no second witness. The two-witness rule applied. The committee determined that the matter could not be established. The accused brother received a warning talk, a generic talk given to the congregation about the importance of moral conduct, with no specific names or details mentioned. He remained a ministerial servant. He continued to volunteer in the back room with children. Sarah's family was instructed not to discuss the matter with anyone in the congregation. They were told that gossip could constitute slander, which was itself a disfellowshipping offense. They were told to trust in Jehovah, to wait on the organization, to have faith that if the brother was truly guilty, Jehovah would handle it in his own time. Patricia followed these instructions. She was obedient. She was faithful. She waited on Jehovah. 2 years later, the same brother was caught abusing another child. This time, there were two witnesses. The child's older sibling had walked in during the assault. A judicial committee was formed, and the brother was disfellowshipped. But the police were never called. Not by the elders, not by the branch, not by anyone in a position of authority within the organization. The brother moved to another town. I later learned, years later, after I had already begun my journey out, that he joined another congregation in another state and abused again. When I found that memorandum in October 2019, the first face that flashed through my mind was Sarah's. I remembered her sitting in that back room, her feet not touching the floor, her voice barely above a whisper, trying to describe what had been done to her while 3 adult men in suits sat across from her with notebooks and Bibles. I remembered the way she looked at me, looked to me, as if I had the power to make it stop, as if I was the one person in the world who could protect her. And I failed her. I failed her because I was following orders. I failed her because I trusted the organization more than I trusted the terrified voice of a child. I failed her because I believed genuinely, deeply, with all my heart, that the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses was directed by God, and that their policies were an expression of divine wisdom that I, as a mere elder, was not qualified to question. I need you to understand the depth of that deception. I need you to understand what it means to believe, truly believe, that 8 men in a compound in Warwick, New York, are God's sole channel of communication on earth. When you believe that, you don't question. You can't question. Questioning isn't just discouraged. It's spiritually dangerous. Questioning is the first step on the road to apostasy, and apostasy is the worst sin a witness can commit. It's worse than murder. It's worse than adultery. An apostate is someone who has willfully turned against God himself, and the punishment is absolute. Disfellowshipping, shunning, complete and total social annihilation. Your family will not speak to you. Your friends will cross the street to avoid you. Your children will hang up the phone when you call. You will become, in every meaningful sense, a dead person walking through a world full of people who once loved you, but now look through you as if you're made of glass. This is the weapon the organization holds over every single one of its members. This is why people don't leave. This is why people don't speak up. This is why mothers like Patricia swallow their screams and tell their daughters to wait on Jehovah, while their daughters' abusers sit 3 rows ahead of them at every meeting, singing kingdom songs and answering watchtower questions as if nothing happened. After I found the memorandum, I couldn't sleep. For weeks, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while my wife slept peacefully beside me. Her copy of the daily text on the nightstand, her convention badge from the previous summer hanging on the mirror. She was beautiful in her certainty. She was beautiful in her faith. And I was terrified that what I'd discovered would destroy her. I began to research, carefully, quietly. I used a private browser on a device my wife didn't know I owned. I felt like a criminal. I felt like a traitor. Every click of the mouse felt like a betrayal of everything I had ever been. But I couldn't stop. The first thing I found was the Australian Royal Commission. In 2015, the Australian government had conducted a sweeping investigation into institutional responses to child sexual abuse, and the Jehovah's Witnesses were one of the organizations examined. What the commission uncovered was staggering. Over 1,006 alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse had been identified in the organization's internal records in Australia alone. Not a single case had been reported to the police by the organization. 1,006 perpetrators. 0 reports. I read the transcripts of the hearings. I watched the video footage. I saw Jeffrey Jackson, a member of the governing body, one of those 8 men I had believed was God's direct spokesperson on earth, sit in the witness chair and, under oath, downplay the organization's responsibility. I watched him squirm. I watched him evade. I watched him suggest that it would be presumptuous to claim that the governing body was God's sole channel of communication, a claim that the organization makes explicitly and repeatedly in its own publications. He lied. Under oath, before a governmental commission investigating the abuse of children, a member of the governing body lied. I found more. I found the Zalkin law firm's cases in the United States, hundreds of lawsuits filed by abuse survivors against the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. I found court documents. I found depositions. I found case after case in which the organization had fought tooth and nail to avoid turning over its internal abuse records, sometimes paying millions of dollars in fines rather than comply with court orders to produce the documents. They were paying millions of dollars to keep those 47,000 files hidden. Think about that. An organization that constantly reminds its members that their donations are used to further the worldwide preaching work, that builds kingdom halls and prints Bibles and funds missionaries in developing countries. This same organization was diverting millions of dollars of donated funds to pay legal penalties for refusing to hand over evidence of child abuse. Your donations. My donations. The money I put in that contribution box every single meeting for 43 years. Some of it went to protect child abusers. I found the Padron case in Montana. I found the Lopez case in California. I found the Conti case, where a jury awarded a survivor $28 million after finding that the organization had been negligent in its handling of a known predator. I found story after story, survivor after survivor, each one echoing the same devastating pattern. A child reports abuse. The elders call the branch. The branch instructs them to handle it internally. The two-witness rule is applied. The abuser is protected. The child is silenced. And then I found the stories themselves. The survivors. The ones who had found the courage to speak publicly about what had been done to them. I read their accounts late at night, in the dim light of my phone screen, tears streaming down my face, my chest so tight I thought I was having a heart attack. They described the abuse itself, the violations, the pain, the confusion, the shame. But what struck me most, what cut deepest, was what they described about the aftermath. They described sitting in judicial committees as children, being asked graphic, invasive questions by men who had no training and no business being in that room. They described being told that they must forgive their abusers. They described being warned not to bring reproach on Jehovah's name by going to the police. They described watching their abusers receive a slap on the wrist, or nothing at all, while they, the victims, were treated with suspicion and disdain. Many of them were eventually disfellowshipped themselves, not for being abused technically, but for the behaviors that often follow abuse. Substance abuse, sexual promiscuity, anger, rebellion. The organization broke them, and then it punished them for being broken. I found a woman who had been abused by her father from the age of 4. She reported it to the elders when she was 16. They applied the two-witness rule. Her father denied it. The matter was dropped. She was told to continue living in the same house with her abuser. She attempted suicide at 17. When she survived, the elders formed a judicial committee to address her suicide attempt, which they classified as a form of self-murder. A sin. She was publicly reproved. Her father remained in good standing. I found a man who had been abused by a circuit overseer, one of the organization's traveling representatives, during a visit to his congregation. When he reported it, he was told that the circuit overseer was a spiritual man, and that such an accusation was clearly the product of a disturbed mind. The man was disfellowshipped for causing divisions. The circuit overseer continued his travels, visiting congregation after congregation, family after family, child after child. I found a boy, well, a man now, but he was a boy when it happened, who had been abused by an elder in his congregation for 3 years. When his parents finally noticed the signs and confronted the elder confessed privately to the body of elders. A judicial committee was formed, and the elder was privately reproved, the lightest possible sanction. No announcement was made to the congregation. No one was warned. The elder's wife was not told. The families with children in the congregation were not told. The boy's parents were instructed to keep the matter confidential. The elder abused 2 more children before he was finally caught by the police. Not because the organization reported him, but because one of his later victims told a schoolteacher. A schoolteacher, a worldly person, someone outside the organization, someone the witnesses would have regarded as part of Satan's system, did what the elders refused to do. She called the police. She protected a child. She did the bare minimum of what human decency requires, and she did it because she didn't have a two-witness rule telling her to look the other way. By November 2019, I was a different person. The man who had walked into that back office on a rainy Wednesday was gone. In his place was someone I barely recognized. Someone angry, someone grieving, someone utterly lost. I began to question everything. If the organization could be this wrong about child protection, what else were they wrong about? I started pulling at threads, and the entire tapestry unraveled. I looked into the organization's history with new eyes. I learned about the failed prophecies 1914, 1925, 1975, dates that had been proclaimed with absolute certainty as marking the end of the world or the beginning of earthly paradise. I learned about the shifting doctrines, the ever-changing definition of the generation that would supposedly not pass away before Armageddon came. I learned about the blood policy and the people who had died, who had let their children die, because they believed God required them to refuse blood transfusions. I learned that the organization had once accepted blood transfusions, then banned them, then created a bewildering and arbitrary distinction between primary blood components, which were forbidden, and fractions of those same components, which were permissible. A distinction that had no basis in Scripture and that had resulted in countless unnecessary deaths. I learned about the United Nations scandal, how the organization, which had publicly condemned the UN as the scarlet-colored wild beast of Revelation, had secretly registered as a non-governmental organization associated with the UN's Department of Public Information, apparently to gain access to library facilities. When this was exposed by a journalist in 2001, the organization quietly withdrew its registration and told its members that the affiliation had been purely for library access. A claim that strained credulity to the breaking point. I learned about the Mexico-Malawi hypocrisy, how, in the 1960s and 1970s, witnesses in Malawi were told they could not purchase political party cards, even though these were essentially equivalent to identification documents, and even though refusing to buy them resulted in horrific persecution. Beatings, rapes, murders, the burning of homes and villages. Meanwhile, during the same period, witnesses in Mexico were permitted to bribe military officials to obtain a cartilla, a military service card, something that was arguably a far more significant compromise with Caesar's things. The difference in treatment was never explained. The Malawian witnesses suffered and died for a principle that their Mexican counterparts were quietly exempted from. Each revelation was a wound. Each fact was a fracture in the foundation of my identity. I had been a Jehovah's Witness for 43 years. It wasn't just my religion. It was my entire social world, my community, my family, my purpose, my identity, my understanding of reality itself. Taking it away was like removing the skeleton from a body and expecting the flesh to remain standing. In December 2019, I made the hardest decision of my life. I went to my wife and I told her everything. I will not describe that conversation in detail. Some pain is too private, too sacred, too raw to put into words for strangers. I will tell you that she cried. I will tell you that I cried. I will tell you that she accused me of being influenced by apostates, and I will tell you that I didn't blame her because I would have said the same thing 6 months earlier. I will tell you that she begged me to talk to the elders, to get help, to come back to my senses. I will tell you that I asked her to read the Australian Royal Commission transcripts, and she refused. I will tell you that she slept in the guest room that night, and for many nights after. I will tell you that she eventually agreed to look at the evidence. Not all of it, but some of it. And I will tell you that what she saw broke her heart the way it had broken mine. Not immediately, not all at once, but slowly, painfully, like ice cracking on a frozen river as the spring sun does its patient, relentless work. In January 2020, I stepped down as an elder. I gave no reason. The brothers were confused, concerned, suspicious. Within weeks, the whispers began. Something was wrong with Brother Daniel. He'd been stumbled. He was spiritually weak. He needed encouragement. Then came the shepherding calls. 2 elders at our door, Bibles in hand, concern on their faces. They asked if everything was all right. They asked if I had been reading negative material online. They asked if I had doubts. They reminded me of the importance of loyalty to the organization. They quoted scriptures about the faithful and discreet slave. They told me that Jehovah would never allow his organization to mislead his people. I sat there and listened. I nodded. I said the right things. I played the part, because I wasn't ready yet. I wasn't ready to lose everything, but I was already losing it. Friends stopped calling. Invitations dried up. People I had known for decades began to treat me with a cautious distance, as if apostasy were a contagious disease and they could catch it through proximity. In March 2020, the pandemic hit, and it gave me something I desperately needed: time. Time to think, to process, to grieve. Time to read, to study, to educate myself about the mechanisms of undue influence and high-control groups. I read Stephen Hassan. I read Bonnie Zeman. I read Raymond Franz, a former member of the governing body itself, who had been disfellowshipped in the 1980s for the crime of following his conscience. Franz's book, Crisis of Conscience, was the final nail in the coffin. Here was a man who had sat in the inner sanctum of the organization, who had participated in the governing body's private deliberations, who had seen firsthand how doctrine was created not through divine revelation, but through votes, through politics, through the personal preferences and prejudices of imperfect men. He described an organization that was more concerned with its own authority than with truth, more invested in control than in compassion, more devoted to its own survival than to the welfare of its members. And he described it with love. That was what got me. Franz didn't write with bitterness or rage. He wrote with the heartbroken tenderness of a man who had loved something deeply and discovered that it was not what it claimed to be. He didn't want to destroy the faith of Jehovah's Witnesses. He wanted to free them. That's what I want too. In 2021, my wife and I formally disassociated. We wrote letters. We handed them in. And just like that, 43 years of relationships evaporated. Our phone went silent. Our mailbox went empty. People we had loved, people we had served alongside, people we had held as they wept at funerals and laughed at weddings and prayed at hospital bedsides. They vanished from our lives as if we had never existed. My mother, who is 81 years old, will not speak to me. She has told other family members that she considers me dead. My brother, who I coached through his first public talk when he was 19, blocked my number. My closest friend of 27 years, a man I called my brother, a man whose children call me uncle, sent me a text message that said, simply, "I love you, but I can't talk to you anymore. Please don't contact me again. This is the cost. This is the weapon. This is what keeps 8 million people trapped inside an organization that protects pedophiles and punishes the people who try to expose them. I'm telling this story because the world needs to hear it. Not just the parts about child abuse, although those parts are critical and they demand justice, and they should provoke outrage in every decent human being who learns about them. But also the parts about control, about manipulation, about the systematic dismantling of a person's ability to think critically, to question authority, to trust their own conscience. The Watchtower organization is not what it claims to be. It is not God's channel. It is not the truth. It is a high-control group that uses fear, isolation, and information control to maintain its grip on millions of sincere, well-meaning people who deserve so much better. I know this because I was one of those people. I know this because I enforced those policies. I know this because I sat across from frightened children and applied rules that protected their abusers. I know this because I participated in a system of spiritual coercion that destroyed families, crushed individuality, and silenced dissent. And I know this because when I finally found the courage to open my eyes, what I saw was not the paradise I'd been promised. What I saw was a kingdom built on secrets and silence, maintained by fear and shame, and populated by people too terrified to look behind the curtain. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to look at the evidence. Read the Australian Royal Commission findings, they're publicly available. Read the court documents from the Zalkin cases. Watch Jeffrey Jackson's testimony. Look at the organization's own internal documents, the ones that courts have forced into the light. Look at what's there, and then ask yourself, is this how God's organization would behave? If you're still inside, I want you to know something. There is life on the other side. It's messy. It's painful. It's disorienting. You'll grieve in ways you didn't know were possible. You'll question everything, including your own sanity. There will be days when you want to go back, when the simplicity and certainty of belief seem preferable to the chaos of freedom. But you'll also discover something extraordinary. You'll discover yourself. You'll discover what you actually think, what you actually believe, what you actually value. Not what you were told to think and believe and value, but the real, raw, authentic convictions of your own heart and mind. You'll discover that morality doesn't require an organization. That love doesn't require conditions. That God, if God exists, doesn't need 8 men in Warwick, New York, to speak on his behalf. I still think about Sarah. I think about her almost every day. I don't know where she is now. I don't know if she's still a witness or if she found her way out. I don't know if she's healed or if she's still carrying the wounds that I helped inflict through my obedience, my compliance, my cowardice. If she ever reads this, Sarah, if you're out there, I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I failed you. I'm sorry that I chose loyalty to an organization over loyalty to a child. I'm sorry that I sat in that room and told you that Jehovah would handle it, when what I should have done was pick up the phone and call the police. I can't undo what was done. I can't give you back your childhood. I can't erase the nightmares or the shame or the years of therapy that I hope you've had and that you certainly deserve. But I can tell the truth. I can say, out loud, in front of anyone who will listen. The Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Jehovah's Witnesses systematically protected child abusers, silenced their victims, and used the machinery of religious authority to cover up crimes that should have been reported, investigated, and prosecuted. And every day that this continues, every day that an elder picks up the phone and calls the legal department instead of calling the police, every day that a child sits in a back room being interrogated by untrained men, every day that the two-witness rule shields a predator from accountability, is a day that the organization adds another name to its database, another file to its fortress of secrets, another child to its list of acceptable losses. 47,000 files. That was the number when I found that memorandum. I have no doubt it's higher now. The question is, how high does the number have to get before we say enough? I said enough on a rainy Wednesday in October. I said it quietly, in a back office, with trembling hands and a broken heart. Now I'm saying it here, loudly, publicly, irrevocably. Enough.